The Dr. Oba T'Shaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba T'Shaka and his guest are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the O.R. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba T'Shaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba T'Shaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, C.O.R.E. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National C.O.R.E. and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba T'Shaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to everyone that's listening to the first show, the Dr. Oba T'Shaka Show. I'm really excited about this. I hope that we'll leave you with some things that will be useful in your lives. This is going to be a show that will be coming on at a minimum once a week. I'm also a writer and organizer, and I do other things. So you'll get at least a minimum of material coming out from me and my team once a week. The topic for today to introduce this show is Free the Mind, and your behind will follow. That is, cleaning up the president of Funkadelic, Brother George Clinton. Made a better president than Bill Clinton. We'd still have some welfare here. In fact, we would have some, what would really be called some faring well for people. So the topic is going to be on freeing the mind. I first want to say that this show will be addressing a wide range of topics, history, it'll be dealing with politics, it'll be dealing with family issues, it'll be dealing with healing issues, spirituality, it'll be dealing with global issues. We'll be discussing Black Lives Matter, which I'm very proud of. And anyone who's got eyes to see or ears to hear should see that something's happening with the hip hop generation. There's a big awakening going on, and I'm so happy to see it. And so we'll be dealing with that. We'll be dealing with issues that affect poverty, both poverty of the mind and the poverty that has put a lot of our people into some serious suffering, and not just our people, but people all over this country and all over the world. And of course, we'll be talking about this funky president and the need to get him out of office. And we'll be in our second program dealing with that and the role that blacks will play in this election, which will be a strategic role. So this is an honor for me to have this chance to share some things with my brothers and sisters and whoever else is watching. First thing I want to do is introduce my crew, my team, because anytime you have a program of any kind that's going to work, it takes more than one person. And so I first of all want to introduce my film man, film person, and also videographer, Brother Rojan, Lowell Rojan. And he's a graduate of the California College of Arts and Crafts. And that's the oldest college dealing with this level of skill in California. And he has dealt with film production, and he's received awards from the Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame, and also from the consortium, the Black Film Consortium. He's filmed in Africa, he's filmed in South America, he's filmed all over the United States. And what I like about Brother Lowell Rojan, he likes to be called Lo, he's also a martial artist, is that he's conscious. And what I really like is we got us a conscious team. A lot of times you think you just have someone who's technical and that's good enough. How you see things is also going to be what the camera sees. So this is a brother that's going to bring beauty to this show. The second member of this team is Brother Cinnabar. Brother Cinnabar, I've known him for a long time. He's been a past member of Woze Community Church, which is an African-centered church, no longer a member of it. And he is a Fortune 500 person who's worked in Fortune 500 companies. He has his own business. And he's pulled me out of a lot of tight situations, you know, where you needed the technical help. I call him and say, hey, Cinnabar. Yeah, brother, he'll be here in 10 minutes. So, you know, we got a team. This is part of our team. And I want to say that I'm really proud to be working with them. Standing in the tiers are a number of great people. Brother James Smalls, who will be coming on at the end of my presentation and saying some things. Brother Smalls is a friend of mine I've known over 45 years. He is a freedom fighter. He is a conscious African. But what I really like about James is he's a beautiful brother. I mean, his words, his walk, and his talk, they go together. And this brother knows so much, and he's so wise, and the hip hop community especially has taken him on as a big book. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So, James, I want to thank him for coming on and sharing a few words of wisdom at the end of this program. And Brother Kaba Kamene is also on, and he's also one of my favorite people who push conscious African-centered thought. And he and James Smalls, they are the people that particularly the youth look up to, particularly, though they speak to a much broader audience, but especially speak to the youth. And this program here, this is a program that addresses both the Black Power and Civil Rights generation and the hip hop generation. I don't just want to talk to the choir. I want to talk to many of those that we're not reaching, and particularly the young. And I know James and I, we were talking about the same thing, that's very important. So Brother Kaba is a brother that I really love. He does beautiful work, and people love him. Third person that'll be coming on is Brother Ustadi Kadiri, former student of mine. He's a member of the Pan-African Peoples Organization, a leader in it, and is one of the people that has run our school, the African Children's Advanced Learning Center. He's a mathematician, a skilled printer, and a skilled mechanic, and a master organizer. And he'll be speaking on this awakening system that is going to be the central point of this opening discussion. So, Brother Ustadi, glad to have him on the program. So, this show is a show that will have the technical support of the two people that I just referred to, but the other support that we're going to have is the audience, because as I see it, the people who view this are going to have a say-so in what we do, because this program is set up to address your concerns, your needs, and to provide some solutions to those needs. And so periodically, we're going to do an open mic or an open thing where you can click in questions where we'll be asking you, what do you think of the show and how can we improve it? And as an organizer, this is a thing that we always do. And as a scholar, we do that too. But to me, this is very important because a lot of people who do shows, they do shows about themselves. And they're not addressing the issues that people are concerned about. So this is our concern. This is especially my concern. The Bambara people of West Africa, these are a people that live close to Mali and the Bangaderia Cliff regions. The book, The Seventh Son, in it, Malcolm's family had a family reunion after he died, and they discovered that he had a great ancestor, great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather named Ajar. And Malcolm's sister speculated that Ajar was probably Bambara. And a lot of my people come from Louisiana. There's heavy Bambara influence in Louisiana. The Bambara are warriors and cultivators and also skilled people. And Malcolm's great-great-great-grandfather was a master builder and a warrior. Bambara bad fighters. And that spirit was passed through Malcolm's family. The Bambara have a saying, and they say that, and pretty much this saying reflects how African people think about the subject of morals. Most people would say the worst thing you can do is commit the crime of murder. And certainly that's a terrible thing. But Africans start with the most basic thing, the truth and the lie. Africans love the truth. African Americans love the truth. And so the Bambara have a saying, and the saying is, lying is a moral leprosy. Think about that. You can't think of a illness that is harder to look at and probably more painful to go through than something that just, wipes you out. And so what they're saying is lying's a moral leprosy because they say it is an act against yourself. It's an offense against yourself. And the reason they say that is because we all have God within ourselves. And God is free of blemishes. The Yoruba, in describing God, who they call Olodumare, they say Olodumare is the one with superlative character. Superlative means someone without blemish, someone without fault. And we certainly know God doesn't lie. And God lies within each of us. So think about it. A people who hold truth as just as natural as breathing, and lying is so bad that it cuts you off from yourself. I say that to say that I'm a human being. I'm not perfect. I have my shortcomings. I work on them. But anybody that knows me will tell you that I don't lie. And I can't stand liars, And what I'm saying that to say is this show's committed to the truth. And we don't care who we unmask. Anybody that knows me, they know that If you want to hear me, you're going to hear the truth. James Small's the same way. Cobbl's the same way. Brother Ustadi, who's going to be coming on, the same way. Black people the same way. Your mama tells you don't lie. You know, most Black mamas, the most important thing they can say about a child is, I got a good child. Not, they got a lot of money, you know, they got a lot of character. That's the thing that matters most. Now, some of us have departed from that way. Some of us, it's the glitz that matters. And that's all that matters. That's not our way. So this show is committed to that. It's committed to the truth. And of course, I know that we live in a society that is dominated by the European or Euro-American. And so there's even a question about, is there a thing called the truth? Yes, that's a white boy's view. We all know there's such a thing as a truth, and we know there's such a thing as a lie. And one of the lies is sitting up in the White House. And another lie is the very constitution of this country, that all men are created equal, you know, when we were excluded as human beings. So this country's founded on lies. So this show is dedicated to telling the truth. So what I want to do is, as an introduction to this, is just go through a little bit of my background as a tie-in to how the themes of this show is going to work, and particularly the theme today, free the mind, and the behind will follow. So first, just as a little comment, because there's a way in which I'm identified. And so you need to understand that. Usually when I'm walking down the street and brothers will come up to me, you know, they see I'm older. And so, you know what they're going to say. They're going to say, hey, OJ, how you doing? You know what I mean? And I smile because I know this is a thing that they intend to, you know, confer as a compliment on me, as a honorific title, OJ, OG. And I say, you know, I look at them. So I say, thanks, brother. I know that what you're saying is meant to be a compliment, and I appreciate it. And I said, yes, I am original. Original gangster is the term they mean. OG, I'm original. Yes, I am. And I know by that you mean old, but guess what? I am original, just like you are. And I said, but in fact, I'm not an OG. I'm an OR. I'm an organizer. So this is my way to get a message across. So I wait for the answer or the response, and I always get the same one. What's that? OR. What's that? I said, well, my name is Oba T. I'm not an OG. I'm an OR. Oba T stands for Oba T'Shaka. I said, I'm an original revolutionary. And I said, as an original revolutionary, I ain't no gangster. So because I ain't nothing original about gangsterism. I said, gangsterism is foreign to African people. For 100,000 years, we didn't have no gangsters. If we despised the lie, do you think that we would have societies where you had gangsters? We didn't have them. I said, but then I go on and I explain, you know, say, hey, brother, but guess what? The original gangster is the ancestors of these people right here that put us in the position we're in. The great, 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 great granddaddy of these so-called founding daddies of this country and the people that make it up. I said his name was John Hawkins. And John Hawkins had him what he called the good ship Jesus. And John Hawkins came to Africa and lied to Africans and told them that if they came to the New World, that what they would get was a house and land and they'd be all right. And then, of course, he engaged in kidnapping. So he was known as a gangster. He was called the Sea Dog. Sea Dog was a term for gangster. I would add to it Sea Dog gangster. And so what he did is kidnap a whole lot of Africans, 2 to 600, stuff them on the good ship Jesus, pack them in like sardines, which became what was called the triangular trade. They take people from Africa to the Caribbean, the United States, and exchange for sugar, other commodities. So this was the beginning of what we call the slave trade. So I say that this, I'm an original revolutionary. And my perspective, which is a perspective that was developed over time, comes from that standpoint. And that means somebody who is trying to produce change through my thoughts and through my walk. So that you understand where this show is going, you need to understand a little bit of where I'm coming from and how that ties into the topics that we're going to be addressing, but also how it ties into the theme of today, free the mind. I'm an organic scholar. I'm a spirit warrior scholar. That's a lot to take in. But I'm a spiritual person. I'm a person that has spent 61 years in battles, in struggles for Black liberation, and years as a scholar, 61 altogether. So that does make me an original revolutionary. So as an organic scholar, what does that mean? Brother Kaba, a number of years ago when we were talking, he made the comment that he has a PhD from Lenox Avenue. That's his PhD, you know what I mean? And I had to laugh because while I have a PhD, I got it late in life. My real PhD is a PhD that comes from Fillmore, the Harlem of the West, you know, where you had a rich Black community, smaller than Harlem, but it was a Harlem of the West. And by organic scholar, what I mean, first of all, is that as a scholar, my scholarship was gained from the grassroots. It was gained from the streets. And the university for me was a Black freedom movement. My teachers was my people's culture, number one. It was my people's culture that woke me up. And this is the key thing. The system that I'm going to be sharing with you, at least the introduction to today, is a system that comes out of an awakening that I experienced, but an awakening that Brother Malcolm X experienced, an awakening that one of the greatest, in fact, the greatest leader in the 20th century that most people watching this haven't heard of, some have, Amilcar Cabral. He underwent. It was a freedom of the mind transformation. And that could only occur for me through an organic experience. That is an experience in the Black freedom movement. And that freedom movement taught me, first of all, that I was asleep when I thought I was awake. Thought I was thinking when my mind was on remote control. I often say I was an automatic double O soul Negro, an automatic pilot, thinking someone else's thoughts while I thought I was thinking my own, until I underwent an awakening. And it was the culture that woke me up. A brother named Norman Brown, who comes out of the place where Zora Neale Hurston was born, in all Black town. Here I've been raised in the Bernal Heights, born in the Fillmore for 7 years, but raised in the Bernal Heights where I saw nothing but white people, except in my home. I was given plenty of Blackness in the home, but every teacher I had for 12 years and for 4 years of college and 2 years of law school, white. So my mind was on the plantation, but I didn't know it. So it's the awakening that I underwent that Malcolm underwent, that Cabral, that a number of our people underwent in the course of struggle, through an organic struggle, through a battle that enabled me, through freeing my mind, to then begin the process of real education. So I had to throw out the miseducation, and I had to go through a new education. And that education, because at that time we didn't have Black studies, and even if we did, it wouldn't have been as good as this one. My university was Marcus Bookstore. My professors were Julian and Ray Richardson. And Ray Richardson was, for me, Big Mama. When the FBI denied me work, Ray got me a job. She said, hey, he just got married. The man needs work. I'm going to tell people something. The real secret weapon in the Black community, Black man's bad. I'm a Black man. I think that, you know what I mean? You're supposed to say that. But the baddest weapon that Black people have is the Black woman. You hear me? Because that Black woman is the one that carries your culture. She's the one that teaches your culture. And she's the one that will stick with you longer than anybody else, not just your mama, but a whole lot of others. And so it was a university of the Black community, and particularly Marcus Bookstore, because as I underwent an awakening, then I understood that if I'm going to lead, I got to read. You get this one. I'm saying this to the hip hop generation, because I know you all love all the stars on YouTube. But Kaba and I, we were talking a year and a half ago or so, and he said, yeah, he loves the love he gets, but he says he wishes that people would read more and have more people they look to. But just don't confine yourself to what somebody says. Think for yourself. And so the thing about the Academy of the Black community that makes it organic is it's like nature. It's interconnected. So the struggle we were engaged in was a political, it was a social, it was an economic struggle. And that shaped who I became, and it also shaped my scholarship. Now, I also want to say this, that in the Black freedom movement of the 60s, and I joined it in 1960, the two most complex battlefields in the freedom movement was New York and San Francisco, because it had the most diverse ethnic mix. And in the case of New York, of course, it's a headquarters of capitalism. And it has a mean, vicious police department. So anything you do, they're going to sick them on you. Spies, boss, they were all over Malcolm's organization and engaged in part in his assassination. That was FBI, CIA, directly orchestrated. They had spies from Boss. In fact, the guy Gene Roberts, who administered breath to Malcolm after he was shot, was a spy for Boss and became later a spy on the Black Panther Party. So these two theaters that were most complex was New York and San Francisco. I want to say this. My thought has evolved as someone who's an organic scholar out of the movement. So it's the complexities of the movement that has shaped the complexities of my thought. And so San Francisco was the second most complex theater, because next to New York, we had the most diverse ethnic mix, the largest and oldest Chinese American community, the only Japanese American community, a huge Latino community, heavily Mexican. And I went to junior high school in that community and knew it. And then a Black community, the base of which was the Fillmore. That was the most conscious community in the 60s. And then because the freedom movement was a movement of young people, just like Black Lives Matter today, you see all these young people. And so we had to know the youth. And so part of the youth that we engaged were college youth, UC Berkeley, San Francisco State. And so it was knowing these different realities. And then our movement was special. All movements are, but this movement was particularly special, and most people know nothing about it. James Boggs, who is one of the best thinkers that we produced in the 60s, an influence on a number of young Black radicals. In one of his writings, he made this comment. He said that the Black freedom movement in the South had come up with a successful methodology for dismantling segregation. That was a perceptive insight because a lot of revolutionary and nationalist Blacks put down the Southern movement as nonviolent, as into integration, as pork chop, this and that, very critical of them, you know? But the fact of the matter is, this movement was successful. It dismantled formal legal apartheid. And so Boggs's point was that the Northern movement had not come up with a methodology to enable them to be as successful on their ground as the Southern movement was. It was a good point. And then it caused me to think. And I said, yeah, except for one place, San Francisco. And I'm not saying it because I was in it. Proof of the pie is in the pudding. Many parts of the North had viable freedom movements. New York, chapter of C.O.R.E had a bunch of different movements on construction sites, struggles for education, and others. C.O.R.E was a cutting-edge organization in New York in the freedom movement. My good friend Jitu Weusi ended up being one of the best organizers in the Black freedom movement, and he cut his teeth in organizing in C.O.R.E. And I didn't know it until near the end of his life because we were close friends, but I knew Brooklyn C.O.R.E. I knew the people in Brooklyn C.O.R.E. I didn't know him then. I knew him in 1972 and on. So C.O.R.E., had a number of movements in the North. Cleveland C.O.R.E. was a strong one. And then the NAACP in Philadelphia had a strong chapter in Philadelphia. And they were dealing somewhat with jobs. So there were movements in different parts of the country. Gloria Richardson in Cambridge, Maryland, a SNCC organizer. But the San Francisco freedom movement is the only movement that mastered this complex urban environment. And it is the only movement that took on economics as the issue. The Southern movement, the issue was the vote and the end of segregation. And they found a series of jujitsu tactics that worked. The march that now Black Lives Matter is using. The march got you voter rights legislation. I was on that march, Selma to Montgomery. I was arrested in Selma. That was effective. That was King. King was not an organizer. He was a mobilizer. He was into the march. And then the march in Birmingham. That was King's best organized campaign. And that got you the Civil Rights Bill after Kennedy was killed. And so Boggs' point was the Northern movement had not come up with a methodology that would work. We did, in part because we recognized that Southern movement drove the Northern movement. We respected them. One of our members, a leader before me, went to Birmingham in the height of King's campaign. His name's Will Ussery. Will's 11 years older than me. He stepped down as chair, and then I assumed chair in 1963. Will is absolutely brilliant. He went to Birmingham for one reason, to figure out how King put that movement together. For one reason, to figure out how we could build a Black United Front. And we had one of the few successful Black United Fronts, and we called it the United Freedom Movement. And once we built that, it took movements, because our movement was a 6-year movement. It took movements that were 300 people in size to 10,000. We had the largest Northern urban movement. I was a principal leader of it, but Will, he figured that out. This movement, this San Francisco Freedom Movement, was able to master its complex environment for a number of reasons. We had a lot of smart people. Most movements did. But the key thing about our smart people is we buried our ego. We had no ego problems. This is real key. Most groups in the movement had ego problems. The FBI could then come in and play off of them. So this was key to our success. So the key thing about this movement for us is it woke me up. It woke a lot of other people up. And so that was the key to its success. But we succeeded in defeating an entire economic power structure, an entire economic power structure, thousands of jobs. And because of the undying love that our people have for each other, and this was true throughout the movement, the Panthers had it, King's organization had it, all these organizations had it. It was an unspoken rule that the jobs that were gained was not for us. And we had unemployed people in our group, but no member of our group took a job. We were fighting for the people. So I'm saying that to say this organic movement shaped my thinking. As I woke up and started hitting the books, the first thing I knew is I had to know my enemy. Because in war, once I woke up, I knew that I was in trouble. I didn't know myself. I didn't know my enemy. I'm headed for defeat. But that wasn't why I started hitting the books. I hit the books because I realized that I thought I was thinking and I wasn't. And when my mind was opened as Malcolm's was, when Reginald came to him and got him, as he said, to think his first free thoughts, I experienced a mental freedom. And at that point, I wanted more. That was the primary motive. And because I was undergoing change, and I was the principal strategist of this movement, that's my first love, strategy, strategy, strategy. Strategy determines whether you win or lose. And so as my mind shifted, my philosophy and attitude and thought pattern and behavior pattern shifted, I began to think differently than the system so that I could think outside the bag and become more unpredictable. So that this awakening contributed to my own success and the success of many others. So that this movement was key as an organic movement in waking us up. So in the course of the organizing of this movement, I gained skills as an organizer. It led me to write 2 books, The Art of Leadership, Volume 1, which took 10 years to write, and The Art of Leadership, Volume 2. And so on this show, we'll do some leadership training. And in fact, I want to do intergenerational leadership training where we bring in some people from Black Lives Matter and some of the people who have been active in the movement over a long time, and we exchange ideas. And so that's one of the things. But these books were written based on the experiences of battles, 30 years at that point, now it's 61. So my scholarship has been a reflection of my organizing. This is this organic scholarship. In 1963, Malcolm X came and met with a group of leaders in San Francisco at the beginning of the high point of the San Francisco freedom movement. We had just formed a united front. And Malcolm was there with a leader of the LA mosque. They were both wearing seasucker suits. These are these little cheap suits that have blue stripes and white. You wear them in the summer, when it's hot. And we went into the meeting room in the Sun Reporter newspaper building, and Malcolm was sitting there with his back to the wall, which was his custom. And he then proceeded to talk. Now, 60 people had been invited to the meeting. Only 14 showed up. My father was with me, and that was a very rewarding meeting. And so Malcolm became an influence on us, and most people don't get it. We became an influence on him. And by the way, there's a film called Make It Plain. And in the film, Malcolm's brother, not his oldest, but an older brother, spoke. And he said, after a while, Malcolm started sounding like the civil rights movement, because Malcolm was pushing inside the nation to get them engaged, not in nonviolence and not in integration, but in voting and in other areas that the nation could agree to. And so when we had our meeting with Malcolm, he said the messenger would be announcing a political action program soon. We didn't know what that meant. And then he was forced out and then later assassinated. So my first book the political legacy of Malcolm X came as a result of being involved in the Black Freedom Movement, this book has been rated #1 by Michael Eric Dyson in the New York Times, against all books on Malcolm, including the autobiography of Malcolm X. So Malcolm is basic to me. I wear a goatee today because Malcolm did. When Malcolm died, I cried more than when my father died. And it's not because I loved him more. His death was tragic. 39, assassination. My father at least lived to an older age. You know, I cried too when he died, but not as many tears. And when you killed him, you were moving against a movement, the best thinking, the best mind. But Malcolm underwent this transformation of free the mind. And he was bad because of the way he internalized this. So the organic nature of the Black Freedom Movement shaped my thought. In the case of the San Francisco Black Freedom Movement, we radicalized white students. You see in Black Lives Matter today, you see a lot of whites out there and some blacks on the ignornet. I have a thing, I call it the ignornet and the Afronet. The ignornet is people talking off their behinds. And so my wife tells me, because I don't watch the ignornet, but she tells me, she keeps me up on the ignornet. And the ignornet is saying Black Lives Matter has been taken over because they see white people on it. You don't know what the measure of takeover is. And you don't understand why white people are out there. And so you see, our movements are driven by culture. The African American culture is the popular culture of choice of this country and the world. And why? Because one of its tenets is freedom. We call this movement a Black Freedom Movement because it's an expression of our culture. So we got white youth engaged in this movement for the same reason. They were caught up in this movement. And so we radicalized white students, just as Black Lives Matter is radicalizing a whole lot of white youth, but they're in the lead. And in the case of UC Berkeley, they were shock troops for us. They went to jail for a year. Any campaign I led, nobody went to jail because I hit the enemy where he is weak. I didn't believe in taking my people and getting them locked up because your troops are in jail. You need them in the street. But the other organizations did that, and I supported. I went to jail 16 times, but they were campaigns other people led. And so after a year of them going to jail, they got radicalized, and they went back to UC Berkeley. And when they wouldn't let them pass out civil rights literature, they raised a ruckus, and they moved to take some power at UC Berkeley. The Black Freedom Movement radicalized the white student movement, and it wasn't just us. SNCC did the same thing with the White Student National Organization. And the Black Panther Party had a major influence on the Weather Underground through the Black Liberation Army. The Black movement in this country leads all others. And so in the course of struggle, I got a lesson in how America works. And I got a lesson in the strategic nature of the power of Black people in this country. And most of us don't realize the power we have because our culture is the popular culture of the United States and the world. When we kick something off here, it spreads around the world. You saw it in 50 countries with Black Lives Matter. The Black Freedom Movement did the same thing. The Black Panther Party did the same thing. Black Power did the same thing. And so I'm saying that to say this. So my thought pattern got to change. I've got to see how powerful our people are. And because I was leading a movement that had victories, I didn't have no defeatist mentality. I don't hardly use the term white supremacy. I understand white people still have power. I don't use it myself, though I understand when other people do, and I'm not critical of it. And the reason is white people are in decline. This white boy here ain't won a war since Grenada and Panama. You know, these boys ain't whipped nobody. And I can tell you, I've never lost a battle. Anytime I cross swords and we beat the biggest bank in the world, the Bank of America. I led that campaign. We kicked corporate behinds. Those are the biggest behinds in this country. When people say kick behinds, they think it's a physical fight. Now, that ain't no big deal. Yeah, we bad with our fists. But take on corporate power, baby. You know what I mean? So the thing is, the white boy's in decline. And in fact, Trump's in office for many reasons, one of which is that whites who back him realize that by 2044, whites will be a minority in this country. And Trump is there to hold it up, to keep it white, to make America great again, is an Adolf Hitler slogan. But it really means make America white again. Well, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall and Humpty Dumpty fell. And guess what? Y'all ain't producing enough babies to counteract what the Mexicans are doing, what we're doing, what the Asians are doing. When that 1965 Immigration Act got passed, due to the pressure of the Civil Rights Movement, we didn't fight for it, but it caused the pangs of guilt among people like Lyndon Johnson. They said, let's open this country up because this country was founded on white supremacy. You understand? They didn't think the Mexicans, who half of their country had been ripped off from, and by the way, one of my specialties is Mexican history, because I organized Chicanos. And then I realized they're an important part of this country. I'm revolutionary, so I want to figure out how this country works so we can unwork it and rework it. You know what I'm talking about? Make it better. Or as our people say, make it mo better. That's me. You know what I mean? So if you're afraid of revolution, you probably be afraid of me. You shouldn't be. You know, the truth will only set you free. By the way, that's a banner over the CIA headquarters. Now, that shows you just how much the truth means in this country. Ain't that funny? So the thing is, when we look at our movements are strategic. They create chain reactions all over the world, and they create chain reactions inside this country. And it created a chain reaction with me because it woke me up, and it woke up a whole lot of other Black folks. And so a lot of my writings come out of that. In the course of study, I had to start looking at African history, because African history, and particularly African philosophy and African spiritual system, when you free your mind, you got to read. You've got to really deal with the truths of your history. And so it led me to think deeper and to think in an African and a new African or African American way, because both of our cultures are aligned. And that's the thing we'll cover in this show, African American culture, something we neglect. Got the greatest culture in this country, and by the way, the most complex, and yet we neglect it. We need to study it because it's the jewel in the crown. And so one of the most important books I've written is a book entitled Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. And this is a book that Dr. Theophile Obenga, who is Dr. Shekinah Diop, the greatest scholar on ancient Egypt in his time. Dr. Obenga is now the greatest scholar on ancient Kemet today. Dr. Obenga described this book as a classic. I have a term for our families. He said it should be in the dictionary. I'll deal with that later. But the thing about that book came as a result of a transformation that went beyond the system we'll talk about today. There's another system. That will be something we'll deal with at another time. So this Black freedom movement shaped my thoughts, and it has a big impact on my actions as well. And then my fifth book, which is a book that it's called The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures. This book is particularly relevant for the hip hop generation, but the older generation as well, because it defines what's hit Black communities since 1968. Brother James Smalls and Brother Kaba, we had a discussion called Elders on Elders, where we introduced that discussion in March, and we'll pick that discussion up again because our families are in disarray now like never before. And we think it's due to slavery. It's due to forces that have hit our Black communities. And it's particularly hit the youth. And it's put them in a bind that no other group of our people have been put in before. And so these last two books come from piping into God's mind. And that is a different experience. And a lot of people will say, well, what is that? George Washington Carver called it thinking God's thoughts. God's within all of us. And sometimes in humility, when we have problems that we can't solve, and I'm not talking about personal problems because you're not thinking God's thoughts if it's just you. It's got to be bigger than you. If you're thinking about and concerned about the cause and condition of Black folks or of humanity, and you haven't got the answer and you've been working on it, then sometimes God comes through. And in the case of George Washington Carver, he came through for him all the time. Greatest scientist in the 20th century. Einstein said he was the second best. Henry Ford said he was the best, but I don't go on Ford. Ford gave him a blank check. He could have put $1 billion on it and got it because Ford would have made $100 billion off of him. He said, no. He said, Booker T asked me to come here, to Tuskegee, and I think I'll stay a little bit longer. And Booker T had been dead in the grave for who knows how long. And in fact, he didn't care about money. He didn't care about money. He said, if I go work for Henry Ford, my people won't get credit for it. He wanted to work for his people, but he piped into God every day. I've just had two pipe ins. He had them all the time. Bad, brother, in our culture. Good. So I'm saying all that to say this. Movements for social change not only systems, but they change the people who are engaged in the movements. And one of the first things that they change is in the Southern movement, this idea of fear. People throw off fear in movements because fear is artificial. And I would say in everybody's human growth and development, fear is something that you need to wrestle with and understand it's a myth. We were not born in fear. Fear is instilled in us. God is not someone who operates on fear. That's false teaching. It's God's unconditional love. And so movements promote growth. But as I said before, movements provoke changes of the mind. And so the main thing I wanted to get down to today is a system for changing the mind. And all I'm going to do today is talk about why it's necessary. And some people have seen some stuff that I've done on YouTube called 6-Fold Stages to Mental Freedom. And some have gone through a course, a 6-day course, 2 hours each, going through stages of mental freedom. And that's good. But that is just an introduction. That is just an outside explanation. But to really get this, there is a process that you have to go through. And the thing that distinguishes this show from most other shows is the foundation for this show is going to be the process for transforming and freeing the mind, body, and spirit, the whole person. And that will be a process that we'll work on over time. And so as we go through shows, some of them will be on history, we'll be looking at, well, okay, how do you apply that to yourself? Carter G. Woodson, who's our master teacher, master historian, master scholar, he wrote a great book called Miseducation of the Negro. And it's a classic work. That's a rare work. And in this book, to paraphrase him, he said, and he was largely referring to highly educated Blacks, largely. He was largely referring to Blacks who've gone to college and who have drank the Kool-Aid. That's who is largely addressing his comment to. So to paraphrase him, I don't want to read him, he said, for taught the same history, philosophy, religion, literature, and general culture of the oppressor, the Negro's mind has been brought under control. And then he said, he will do what he is expected to do without being told to do so. He said his miseducation dictates it. This observation was true, and this observation made this book a classic, along with many other things. And by the way, this is a book with, as far as I recall, no footnotes. This was the experiences and wisdom of Dr. George Washington Carver. By the way, I have a library here that includes 40 volumes of George Washington Carver's Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. And it's research stuff that his organization did. He's written all kinds of books for children and for everything else. So he was right in that he was saying that the basis for miseducation is misinformation. That's basically what he's saying. He's saying that fed the same information that whites have used to educate themselves, and for blacks to take this on, then their minds have been put on automatic pilot and remote control. And so we know what that history is, a history that you contributed nothing to humanity or civilization. Hegel, who was the intellectual author of this, would say that Egypt was a part of the spirit of Asia, and that dark Africa was savage. And how he couldn't say Egypt was Asian. He couldn't get away with that. So it's the spirit of Asia. Now, Kemet civilization, meaning land of the blacks, traces back in pre-dynastic history 10,000 years. Asians come on the scene 2000 BC. Long after, they come much later than ancient Kemet. So how could Kemet take on the spirit of a people that didn't even exist as a civilized people when they created their civilization? So, but many of us came to believe that. Many of us came to believe that we had no history. And so Carter G. Woodson was saying that we need to correct the record. And so he spent a lifetime writing about the history, as many of our scholars have. And so he was right in that. But there's another part to this. You see, it is extremely important that you know your history, you know your culture, you know your politics. But what Carter G. Woodson missed, and I'm not criticizing him for this, because in his time, he didn't have enough information on how African education worked, or even the best African-American education worked, to talk about our system for teaching. And so he didn't mention pedagogy when he talked about the systems that the white boy has got us to adopt that turns us against ourselves and gets us not to think for ourselves. Pedagogy means system of teaching or system of instruction. In ancient Kemet, the symbol was Seba, S-B-A, and then we don't know how the people spoke, but so the vowel has been added, E, S-E-B-A. It means star, and it means the light within and bringing it out. And that is the Kemetic conception of education. The Greeks had a term that was almost identical because they took it from the Kemites, except that they said that education was only for the male, typical of them, rugged patriarchy, you know. So we now know some things about this process of education to know this. It's not only the information that you get, it's not only the African and African-American truths that you get about your history, your philosophy, your religion, all of your systems. It's not only what you teach, but it's the way you teach. And the way you teach, if it is in conflict with what you teach, can wipe it out, because you can end up parroting a lot of stuff that sounds positive. But if the way you've learned your system is the same as the system that has been used to oppress you. Even though you think you've been liberated, your mind is still incarcerated. This is the key thing I really want you to get. Dr. Theophilo Benga has put it this way, because he's conscious of this. He said, we got a problem. We have African-centered thought and a European methodology. He said, that's a problem. Big problem. Most of us don't know how to get out of it because the more fully entrenched we have been in their system, then the harder it is for us to see a way out. You understand? And so it's the way out that's important. Now, we've had people like Paulo Freire who talk about the problem of Western education is banking. They drop information on us and we feed it back. That is a problem in Western miseducation. He's right. Yeah, we get information and then we regurgitate it and feed it back. And so I was in Tanzania years ago. There's a brother named Mzee, and he had a saying. He said, ask an educated Black person something and he'll quote you something. Ask a Black person who just off the street and he'll give you his opinion. And he'll usually act like he doesn't know what he's talking about. He'll play Brer Rabbit on you. You know what I mean? And if you fall for it, you have really fallen into the pit and lost your mother wit. You understand? So what's the point? The Western method of education that we get, one that we transcended through this free the mind system that Malcolm transcended, that Cabral transcended, that others transcended, it's based on a man named Descartes, or the Cartesian split, where he separates mind from body. And what ends up happening in Western education is all they teach us is to the mind. And so as a result of that, even when we get African-centered education, not having an understanding of our own methodology, we do the same thing. We teach solely to the mind, but there is a spirit and there is a body. And so here's the point that I want to make, and this is the fundamental point, that if we are going to know something, knowing cannot be separate from being. So in ancient Kemet, Ma'at is described in many ways, but one of its most important ways is as truth. I will focus on that. It was harmony and many other things, but truth. So if we say we are following the way of Ma'at, and we quote all these things, harmony, truth, justice, balance, right order. But how do we know Ma'at? We know Ma'at by being Ma'at. Going back to the beginning of the Bambara, hating the lie, seeing it as a moral leprosy. How do we know the truth? We know the truth by being the truth. And so Western thought deals only with the knowing, not the being. And here's the deal. When all you have that you're teaching to is the mind, and you take the spirit out and you take the body out, then you're easily controlled. Get that one straight. And a Black person can do it as well as a white person and not even know it. Because when you free the mind and the behind follows, then what that means is your spirit follows. Brother Smalls has a saying. He says, if I don't feel you, I'm not with you. If my spirit don't get you, I can't work with you. He come from South Carolina. Because he's thinking also with the spirit. You understand? So some of us are already grounded in this. But the fact is, the more miseducated we are, the more we're pulled away from this. We're either thinking somebody's thoughts like I was when I underwent my awakening, or we think we have deeply immersed ourselves in knowledge, because at that point I knew nothing about Africa, but now, you know something. But are you being what you know? That's the thing. You hear me? You don't know the truth unless you be the truth. And that's not easy. That ain't easy because we all got contradictions. You know what I mean? So the thing is, that's what this free the mind is about. It's about freeing the spirit and it's freeing the behind. And I'm telling you something. Those leaders that had this, those groups that had this, those people that have this, those individuals among our people that have this, then they're in a much stronger position than those that don't. If organizations, I'm not going to name names, but if some organizations that had this methodology, which we're going to take you through at another time, then some of the things that happened wouldn't have happened. You hear me? Because when you have people in control of their mind, spirit, and body, nobody's in control of them except themselves and God, who is within each one of us. So this is the key point. I want to take a few examples. Muhammad Ali. He said many times, I am the greatest, even before he had knocked anybody out. But remember, he had over 100 fights by then. He was a golden, boxing, Golden Gloves boxing champion. And he had also won the Olympics. He wasn't talking out of his mouth. But the point is, he proved that maybe he was the greatest heavyweight. Most people say Sugar Ray Robinson was the greatest boxer, period. And it's interesting, Muhammad Ali patterned his style of boxing after Sugar Ray Robinson. And it's interesting, when he won his first title, it was Sugar Ray Robinson that was right next to him grinning. If you go look at the films, go look at it. Because he had that speed of Sugar Ray Robinson. And then he always said, I'm pretty. And Sugar Ray Robinson was definitely pretty. He was a good looking black man. You know what I mean? But the key thing is freeing the mind so the behind will follow. What does this have to do with Muhammad Ali? Muhammad Ali was faced with a challenge when they were going to draft him to Vietnam. It was a big challenge. Was he going to go? And someone in the nation told him that no Vietnamese had ever called him the N-word. By the way, you'll never hear that word on this show. Never. It's banned. Because it's not a part of my thought process. People who come on that have it, you just can't use it here. And I understand I can't ban it from your mind because it will only be banned when the plantation gets out of your head. And when the plantation gets out of your head, the B word and the N word will be gone. You hear me? Just like Richard Pryor, who was using it all the time until he went to Africa and came back. I didn't see no N's over there. And he stopped using it. And I could understand him using it given how he was raised. You understand? He made humor out of something that wasn't funny. Baddest comedian along with Moms Mabley. I think she was as good as him. You understand? So what we need to look at is Muhammad Ali. What was his greatness? His greatness was in his hour of decision. His character is what he stood on. Mike Tyson's manager said this of Muhammad Ali. He was the greatest because of his character. He said that in adversity, he could always fall back on his character. And when he faced George Lumberjack Foreman, who had a punch like a tree trunk, when you saw him hit a bag, it was like a tree trunk hitting a bag. I saw the film that Muhammad Ali starred in himself, and he talks to the trainer, the guy, the boxer that trained with George Foreman. And he asked him, how can I beat him? And the guy said, you can't. And Muhammad Ali knew under normal circumstances, he couldn't. And he said later, he was afraid of Foreman. You know what I mean? Huh? And he was past his prime. He didn't have those fast feet anymore. But he went inside of himself, and it was his character and his wisdom that won that fight. But the key thing about that war in Vietnam is Muhammad Ali didn't just speak the truth, he did the truth. He didn't just say, I'm against this war. He stood up and gave up his title. He gave up his prime. And for an athlete, that's everything. Prime is when you do your best. He never got to see himself do the best. One time he went to see one of his ex-wives. All his ex-wives looked the same. All of them pretty. They all look the same. You understand? I don't know why he didn't just stick with one of them. That first one is the one he should have stuck with. It was in the Nation of Islam, because she was telling him who everybody was that was crooked, including Elijah Muhammad's son. He was telling him, cut him loose. You know what I mean? But I understand. You a man like that, you just can't help it. I understand. God slapped him on his hand and sent him to the highest reaches of heaven. Be sure of it. He went to see one of his ex-wives, and she said something that no ex-wife says of an ex-husband, or hardly ever, and very few wives will say of their husband. She said, I looked in his eyes and I saw God. I looked in his eyes and I saw God. His character, he was kind. He was generous to a fault. He cared about humanity. His mind, his spirit, and his body was all in the same place. You hear me? He walked his talk. There was no daylight between it. I got nothing but the highest respect for that black man. El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, and I'll end on this one. John Henry Clark and I, we would often talk, and John would say, because he was Malcolm's advisor on foreign policy. And, John himself would say this, he had a mind better than 40 people. And I would say, well, more like 400, John. You know what I mean? John was smart. And John was humble. John was not arrogant. And John was smart. But he was also wise and humble. But he said this of Malcolm, and many others have said the same thing. He was the best mind. He didn't say that we produced. He said the best mind produced in this country. And I would qualify that and say the best political mind. That's what he was good at, politics, history. But what was the secret to Malcolm's brilliance? Was it IQ? I don't think that IQ amounts to too much of anything, Obama had 140 IQ. He said he was the smartest person in the room. Well, look who's sitting in the White House right now. Understand? You underestimated the dummy, because the dummy knew other dummies. That was the people that voted for him. You understand? You underestimated him. You understand? So I don't think that IQ measures too much of anything. And in fact, the eugenists, the people who deal with lobotomies and stuff like that, think that other people are inferior, they created the IQ test. I think that intelligence is really demonstrated by how you negotiate life, how you handle crisis, the wisdom that you show, and of course, the character. And of course, if we wanted to do an IQ test, let James Smalls or Copper or John Henry Clark was alive, let him or one of our other scholars come up with a test, and we'll see who passes it. See how many white people pass it. See who's smart, who's dumb. But the thing is, I would argue this, that the thing that made Malcolm stand above everybody else when it came to brilliance was that his wisdom came from his total being. He was totally committed to what he did, mind, body, and spirit. He underwent a transformation, and he grew, and he constantly grew. And so as a result of that, he stood for truth, and we hold him in high regards to this day. So I want to end by just simply saying this, that this free the mind system, we're going to pursue it in depth as periodically we go through our programs. And because this AfroNet gives us the opportunity to have time and to explore things in depth, we're going to be able to engage people in a way that we can get into the depths of their being, to work transformation as we talk about history, as we deal with politics and other things. So that is really the goal of this show. More than anything, is transformation and growth. And I want to say something about myself. This is no power trip for me. I'm not going to get anything out of this. Personally, I have a special gift, and that gift is, my gift is I empower other people to draw on their own strengths. That's a special gift of mine. I'm an astrologer. I say that with hesitation because some of us have been brainwashed on spirit, so we think that's mumbo jumbo. But I know through looking at my own destiny pattern, and that all that is the choices you made in heaven. That's your print, your destiny print. It's like a fingerprint, and we all have one. We all come in with gifts. So when you talk about Seba and bringing the light from within out, that's bringing the gifts that you brought here out. By the way, George Washington Carver had a saying. He said, you can't teach anybody anything. All you can do is bring out what is within them. He didn't know that was Seba. But you see, a part of our culture still held on to this. That's why we're going to explore this mighty culture. I love Kemet, but you know, it's a poor frog that won't praise its own pond. And I'm going to tell you the pond I love most is muddy waters. You hear me? I like the spiritual blues. I like the blues people. That's the foundation of our art form. And by the way, we don't only have a popular culture that is African-based, reworked in this country through stress and strain and trial and tribulation, but we also have an art form. The Euro-American has a culture that's a pure import. The only thing original about the Euro-American culture is it's not original. The other thing is it's an exaggeration of Europe, and of course it's oppressive. And that's why we find some whites defecting to our side. We don't defect that much. What was it, 6% that voted for Trump the last time? I just want to say, we'll spend a lot of time on this in the next show. What we need to do, and this is the theme for the next show, it is vote Trump out of the White House and send him to the jailhouse. And if you just look at his tax returns, he will send himself. Trump is his own best friend and worst enemy. He's been able, through psycho babble, through lies and everything else, to advance himself. What billionaire would want to be a celebrity and an apprentice? Who would have the time? What billionaire is going to be sitting around? Yeah, he got 80 million or whatever, you know, on his show. And by the way, CNN, the guy who is president of CNN said, this is somebody that tells the truth. This guy was the one that put him into Celebrity Apprentice. And this is the guy that opened up the microphone at CNN once it became clear that Trump had a following in 2016, so that every Trump rally was covered. When Bernie Sanders wasn't. When Hillary Clinton wasn't. You understand? And then they pretend to be objective. So I'm saying, I ain't getting off the topic here. If you got any sense, you better realize this is an important election. This is the second post-Reconstruction that we're going through right now. And in the first one, they roll back the gains of the first Reconstruction. The Black Freedom Movement that I was a part of was regaining what we had lost in the first post-Reconstruction. Now we're going through the second. You'd better fight. And if you got any feet, get out in the street. I know there's a COVID-19 out there, so if you can't do that, then do something else to support them. But if you mask up and keep social distance, get out in the street and support those brothers and sisters. You hear me? They're smart. They're making the right move. I want to say finally that get this book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures. Get this book. And this will be the basis for a lot of the discussions we have. And this book introduces you to the system of free the mind. And for all the people that have taken the course, the 6-day course, you just got the white side because you got the information. You didn't get the transformation. And I'm going to tell you something, just like the organic classroom of the Black Freedom Movement, this is going to be like that. This is going to be like what the bookstore was, the Black bookstore was in the Black community. The AfroNet serves that role right now. So I just want to say that I'm really happy to have this opportunity, along with my team, to be sharing some knowledge with you. And for all of you hip hoppers out there, all of you creative people, and for people of my generation, younger and older, whatever your walk of life is, we got something for you. Because in the end, what we want to promote is not only the freedom of the mind and the freedom of the behind, but self-love, self-knowledge, and self-respect. Thank you. You made a sacrifice for me. I appreciate that. So, brother, whatever you'd like to say, I'd sure like to hear your words of wisdom.
My brother, first, to my brother, Dr. Oba, I congratulate you on your AfroNet program. And I'm honored to be a part of this, particularly the first show. When I was the director of cultural education and social studies with 35 schools, I was responsible for 35 schools. We used to bring teachers and parents and the community. And I bought 50 of those copies, both 1 and 2. And I literally took them through the book. I used one book. Number 1, I used for an entire year. We met on Thursdays. And then we used part 2 the second year, because I felt that art of leadership and the way you broke down leadership was extremely important. And your books talk to the community, which I think is very important, because that's who we have to organize and mobilize. And I see that you spoke about something that I repeat constantly: strategize. It's about strategy, strategy, strategy.
You're an encyclopedia of this struggle. You are an extraordinary reservoir. There are a lot of people, there's so many books have been written on the 60s and the 70s, but very few was written by people who were at the struggle. You know, they're almost always written, and when I read them, I know they weren't there. You know, not only because I didn't see them, but I know they didn't capture what really happened that produced the situation that followed. You know, but you were there. Not only were you there, like I think you said a little while ago, you were being. You not only knew what went on, but you were being what was going on. And you were part of that, you know, and I was a part of that history going back to 67 when I came out to California, and certainly in the South before I came out there. But I've watched you. Mostly I know you from not so much ASCAC, like most people would think, but the Black United Front. You know, and we don't say enough about the role you played in the Black United Front. And you were that educational foundation for the Black United Front, as well as that strategist and political guidance in the Black United Front.
Dr. Oba T'Shaka is the author of 5 books, each of which is considered a masterwork. His first book grew out of his organizing in the Black Freedom Movement, entitled The Political Legacy of Malcolm X. Dr. T'Shaka's books on Malcolm X covers dimensions missed by Alex Haley's autobiography. And unlike Manning Marable's book, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, which argues that Malcolm abandoned black nationalism by reinventing himself with a false narrative of his life, Dr. T'Shaka examines Malcolm's thoughts and shows that Malcolm did not reinvent himself. He transformed himself and remained not only a black nationalist, but broadened his revolutionary philosophy while working to radicalize the civil rights movement into a human rights movement. In this analysis, T'Shaka combines activism with scholarship and allows Malcolm to speak for himself. The Art of Leadership, Volume 1 and 2, are Oba T'Shaka's second and third books. They are the only books in the modern world today on African and African American leadership traditions and systems. These 2 volumes are used in Black Studies departments, seminary programs, churches, and community organizations in Africa, Britain, Holland, and the Caribbean, and throughout the United States. T'Shaka's fourth book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, is considered by scholars to be a classic because it is the only book to accurately define the paradigm or model for African and African American families. This is a paradigm that will provide balance for Black and non-Black male-female relationships. Dr. T'Shaka's fifth book, The Integration Trap, specifically the generation gap caused by a choice between two cultures, explains what has gone wrong in Black families, communities, and nations since 1968 that has led to shifts in Black values and behavior not arising from enslavement. T'Shaka shows that since 1968, powerful hostile forces have hit Black communities and African nations, causing them to make a choice between two cultures, one African American and one European American. This book examines African and African American culture in depth, with a focus on how to rescue African American communities nationally and African nations globally. Currently, Dr. T'Shaka is writing his sixth and seventh books, tentatively entitled SIBA, Mastering Your Inner Light of Wisdom. This book covers the pedagogy or teaching method used in ancient African cultures and African American cultures to produce masters in all walks of life.